present their requests or concerns and answer any questions of the Planning Commission. Groups are requested to select a spokesperson to express the group's concerns because each side will be allowed 10 minutes to speak. Plats, rezoning, revised master plans, and street renamings require a public hearing after which the Planning Commission will deliberate and render its decision. Planning Commission members with a personal or financial interest in any petitioner's request are required to recuse themselves. If a motion to deny a request is made, a reason must be given for that denial. Tommy, have we got any changes and things? Okay, let's everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes. Any changes, additions? Not a motion's in order.
Move to approve.
Second. Y'all got the two? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, Tommy.
First item is presented by Engineering Design Group LLC on behalf of OLP RM Partners and TWAS Properties LLC requesting final approval of Southern Boulevard Corporation Plat Number 3 in southwest corner of Vaughn Road, Seaton Boulevard. It's a B3 district.
Okay, who's going to present this? Oh, all right, sir. Name and address, if you would, please, sir.
Good evening. My name is Brandon Hebron. Address is 10654 Springtree Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I am here tonight to request approval of the final plat. As mentioned, it's a 9.67 acre tract located at the southeast corner of Vaughn Road and Seaton Road.
Okay. Any questions from the Planning Commission? Anyone wish to speak for or against? If not, a motion's in order. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the time.
The next item by Jeffcoat Engineers and Surveyors on behalf of the Maddox Family Farm LTD. Request final approval of Maddox Family Farm Plat Number 1 on the north side of Alabama River Parkway, 75 feet east of Jackson Ferry Road. It's a flood hazard in M3 districts.
I'm here representing the Maddox Family Farm venture, who has several acres surrounding this property in the sand gravel business, and the son is going to develop single family dwelling on this piece of property. I have a nice river house out there. You'll look at the access is a little bit wild looking, but it follows a boundary of the adjacent property to get back to Alabama River Parkway. So they'll be developing a private drive to have frontage along the Alabama River Parkway. And of course, it's never been platted, so it's required being in your PJ. We'd appreciate an affirmative on this today. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the Planning Commission or comments? If not,
the portion of that goes across the driveway, is that on the other person's land or is that on your land?
It runs along the border of the adjacent land, which is some of the entities of the toll bridge people, which is right across the river. And so we're making the property line one and the same, and 60 feet wide, in case he ever wants to go in and branch off of it with other roads in the future. But he could just gonna put a gravel driveway in now.
Okay.
I hope I answered it because I couldn't understand you too well.
any other comments or questions from the Planning Commission? Anyone wish to speak for or against? If not, a motion's in order.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The third item is by Jeffcoat Engineers and Surveyors on behalf of Rosie Pinkston, requesting final approval of Rosie Pinkston Plat No. 1 on the east side of Wares Ferry Road, 400 feet north of Rhodes Lane. It's an agricultural district.
Of course, this will be also developed as 2 single-family dwellings. I have several members of the Pinkston family here. If I can't answer the questions, we'll see if they can. And they plan to develop this into 2 single-family individual lots.
Okay. For housing, for mobile home housing, what?
For
A built house.
yeah, frame.
Okay, frame house. Okay, thank you. All right.
2 houses already there.
Well, that's because you went and looked at it. Okay. Anybody else have a comment or question? Anybody in the audience wish to speak for or against? If not, a motion's in order.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a second. All those in favor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Y'all too. Y'all too. Thank you.
Next item is by Clarion Associates, an update on the zoning ordinance.
Thank y'all. You're certainly welcome to stay. This is just something that we're going to do with the members of the Planning Commission, but you're certainly welcome to stay and listen if you'd like. That's what your dad is.
Here we go.
All right, I'm gonna wait until everybody gets their copy. All right, I think everybody does. For the record, I'm Robert Smith. I'm City Planning Director here at the City of Montgomery, and it's always an honor, a pleasure, a privilege to be here with y'all tonight. We are here to present the draft of the code assessment, which is the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations that are in place right now, that have been in place since 1963. As a part, if you remember when we last first met with you, when we started the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations kickoff back in about the June or July timeframe, we told you that one of many implementation requirements of the Envision Montgomery 2040 Comprehensive Plan was to update the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. So the previous comprehensive plan was just as old as the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. So we've begun that process. We had a kickoff with you all and many of the city departments that actually used the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations back in the summer, and to get their ideas, thoughts, issues, everything associated with the code, as well as we've tried to get some input from developers, real estate interest, architects, engineers, people that actually use the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. So now at this point, after that kickoff process, the consultants have done a full assessment on the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, and that is what we would like to present to you today. As you recall, we engaged in a consulting contract, the City of Montgomery, with Clarion and Associates as the primary consultant. Sub-consultant is Planning Next, who was the actual consultant that completed our comprehensive plan that was adopted in July of 2020. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Clarion and Associates, who's going to give you all a presentation on where we are with the actual zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations assessment, in which after, and they'll go through this, we will begin the process of actually writing, doing the actual update of the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations update.
Robert, if you
Yes.
don't mind, you know, we have had quite a bit of planning from the planning department where we said this didn't fit into the 2020 or this was omitted by, you know, that type of stuff, which is nothing abnormal. That's normal.
Correct.
And just cleaning up and so on and so forth. My question is, how do we know that those get transmitted when we make a change like that? Because it's not. How do you get that in the 2040?
Back in the 2040
Yeah.
comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
So we will bring back to you at some point an updated future land use map.
Yeah, but we're not gonna know.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
that's
saying?
right. So
Just how, it's just from a practical standpoint. When we say in here, well, this doesn't, or this does, or whatever the change is, and this, they just made a mistake there. I mean, you know, it's just things. Do you go back and have that written down where you?
absolutely. Yes,
So
sir.
you
Yes,
can-
sir.
So you can say for sure that those changes that were made are in here,
Absolutely.
are gonna be in this.
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
But
that's
now
all I
this
wanted.
is, just keep in mind, what you're talking about
it's-
is the comprehensive plan document itself.
Right.
This is the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations.
Right.
That regulate all of the land and property across the whole entire city and the planning jurisdiction.
But also, apparently, there's no time frame to update what Buddy's talking about. You said at some point, so there's
Yes.
no time frame. So
Well, we actually, we could cut it off based on what we know about at this point and bring that back to you, and we will at some point in the near future, but there's no guarantee of what we may find in the future because, you know, we look at all of the rezoning proposals on a project by project basis, and sometimes we may find things from time to time that would have to be updated
You
again.
probably find things that we don't even know about.
Absolutely,
So- And that's
absolutely.
all I was asking, really. It was just I figured you had it, but I wanted to hear you say it. So-
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
every document that the city has is a living, breathing document, meaning that it's never final.
Okay.
That they can always be updated and changed. Correct.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got
One
yes, sir.
question. The thing you're bringing before us today, is that to just give us an idea of what you're going to do, or are you looking for
Yes.
input? Are you looking for input also?
Yeah, we're always looking for input. So this is the assessment based on input that we've gotten, and I give you even more. So we met with the mayor this morning to give him an update of the actual assessment. Got some input back from him. We've met with the city council president and the pro tem this afternoon before we came here to give them an overview and get some input from them. And so this is that public draft that, you know, we're open to more comments based on what's in the draft, and they will go through that in just a second with the presentation. So yes, sir, always open. And we've got Craig Richardson and Jeff Green from Clarion Associates that's going to give the overview of the assessment.
Good evening, Planning Commission members. I'm Craig Richardson with Clarion Associates. It's a pleasure to be back in front of you. What Jeff and I are going to do is we have a PowerPoint presentation, which Robert provided you a copy of. And really what we're going to try to do, or what we're going to do, is highlight for you sort of what is in this assessment, which I know you have copies of. We have also placed it on the website for the project. In terms of just where we're going, this sort of slide overviews it. I want to just take a couple of minutes and talk about where we are in terms of the overall project. Then second step, Jeff and I are going to review what is in the assessment, and then we'll talk we'd like to get input from you if you have any comments or suggestions, things that need to be added, things that need to be changed. We'd love to hear that from you this evening, and then we'll talk about next steps. In terms of the overview, the update to the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations is a 5-step or 5-task process, which is shown on this graphic. We started the project initiation over the summer, met with staff, met with you, met with some other folks in the community, provided surveys, and then received input. Based upon that, our review of the recently adopted comprehensive plan, our own independent review of your zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, we have prepared this code assessment, which does several things. Number one, it identifies, based upon plan direction, based upon the input we received in these meetings in the summer and the surveys, what we heard about what is important to be updated in the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. We feel like this code assessment stage, the stage we're at right now, is important before we start the drafting, because basically what we identify or what we outline in the assessment are issues that we've heard either from you or in the plan. It's what is important in addressing in the update, and then we make suggestions and recommendations on how to achieve those objectives or goals. Once we get the input, we'll make some changes or revisions to the assessment outline to the extent that we get direction to do so, and then we start the code drafting. We'll use that as the assessment outline or annotated outline as a roadmap in the drafting. That's task 3. That's going to really occur primarily over next year. And then once we will have meetings on several installments. We're not going to draft the entire document at one time. We'll do it in installments. We'll have meetings on those installments and get input. And then once the whole documents are drafted, we'll then do some testing, actually look at sites in the community and compare what could be done under your existing regulations versus what could be done under the updated regulations to see if we're achieving the objectives you want. We always, and that's the task 4, and then based upon the input from that, we'll make further revisions and we'll have a public hearing draft. One of the things that we did here today in the meetings with the mayor and several of your elected officials is they would like to see this process actually move faster than under the schedule we're proposing, and we told them that we would take a look at that. What we can control is we can control the actual drafting. Obviously, when we get into the public input stage, if there is a lot of public input, then that could slow the process down. But we are actually going to look about expediting the overall schedule to the extent we can. So that's really, we're at task 2, and in terms of where we're going to get to updated code, we've got 3 more tasks after task 2. I just will mention again, we talked about this when we met with you before, but we do have a project website. The web address for the website is up on the screen. There's general information about this project on the website. There is a place where anyone in the community or anyone who accesses the website can sign up to receive updates about any meetings that are held. Tonight's meeting was identified. If anyone has signed up, they received a notification. We also post all documents or materials that are prepared for the project. The code assessment has been updated and is on the website. Anyone can download it. And we have contact information. In other words, information about how anyone can contact Robert and his staff if they have specific questions about the project. So that's available.
You said the web page is on the screen, but what about in this document? Is it in here?
I'm sorry.
Page 3.
He answered me, never mind.
He got it.
You got it? Okay. The actual code assessment includes 4 parts. It has an introduction and overview, very short. It's about 3 or 4 pages. At the very beginning of the document, it explains what the code assessment is, sort of outlines, what I've just explained to you. And then the second part, and this is the largest or longest part of the document, it's about 50 pages. It actually identifies 5 goals or themes that we have identified based upon the meetings we've had, based upon the direction of the plan, with a discussion of each of those and recommendations for how those goals or themes can be addressed in an updated zoning ordinance and subdivision regulation. The third and fourth parts of the assessment, basically after these discussions, consist of an annotated outline of the updated zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations if the suggestions that are discussed in the diagnosis are followed. And they're both about 15 or 20 pages. They provide a sort of a roadmap that, based upon your input and the other input we received today, and from the input we'll receive from the staff, the roadmap that we would follow in actually doing the drafting in Task 3. So that is basically the 4 parts to the code assessment. So I mentioned there are 5 themes that are identified in the diagnosis part of the code assessment. Jeff and I are going to cover each one of these and highlight for you the suggestions or recommendations that are outlined in the assessment for how to address achieving each of these themes. With respect to theme 1, and there was a very broad consensus on this from everyone we spoke to, that in the updated codes need to be more user-friendly than the current regulations. Certainly this is not a surprise. Your current zoning ordinance was originally adopted in the 1960s, and the subdivision regulations in the 1980s. There have been amendments, but in a lot of respects, the overall structure and format is pretty old. There has been a lot of changes in our ability to draft and structure and use graphics and things like that in development codes, especially over the last decade or so, which we believe, and from our experience, shows that make these development codes much more user-friendly. We suggest 4 or 5 ways to make the updated code more user-friendly. The first doesn't deal with the graphic and the illustrations, but basically is just the structure of the code. In other words, to make it more logical and intuitive. Basically, there are what we have learned from experience is that even though these are very, very large documents, especially the zoning ordinance, that there are three organizing concepts in the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. Those organizing concepts, number one, are procedures. In other words, what are the development review procedures that the code requires under different conditions an applicant has to get approval for, a rezoning or special exception, variance, and then subdivision, sketch plan, preliminary plat, final plat. But those are the procedures. With respect to the zoning ordinance, in looking at your current regulations, we found that these procedures are in different sections or parts of the code. In many respects, they are not very well integrated, and so there is clearly an opportunity, based upon our past experience, to consolidate the procedures in one section. I'll talk about that in more detail in a couple of minutes. The second sort of organizing concept in the zoning ordinance are the zoning districts themselves and the uses. In other words, what are the zoning districts that the code uses and applies to different geographic areas in the community? And then what are the uses that are allowed in each of those districts? And in addition to that, what are the dimensional standards? In other words, the setback requirements of the lot area requirements, the height limit, restrictions and things like that. So what we have also recommending is that the zoning districts and the use regulations be side-by-side articles, and they be well integrated so that when someone looks in the zoning districts, it becomes easy for them also to identify what the uses that are going to be allowed in that particular district, as well as the dimensional standards. And then the third overriding concept or organizing concept are the development standards. And what I mean by that are things like parking requirements, landscaping requirements, signage requirements. Basically, requirements that affect what else can go on a site and how much parking there'll be, things of that nature. So what we're recommending is that the organization of the updated zoning ordinance basically recognize and consolidate those three organizing concepts, and then the other provisions or other articles will support them. Things like the definitions, which they're primarily consolidated now, but making sure that they're all appropriately consolidated, and things of that nature. So we set out in the assessment, a recommendation for this sort of restructuring. Another recommendation, I mentioned graphics, I mentioned the use of photographs and other types of tables and flowcharts that you currently don't have in your regulations that we can add and we think will make a very, very big difference in terms of the user friendliness of the document. On this particular slide, this is an example of a zone district format or structure that we have used in a number of other actually development codes over the last 5-6 years, where you can see where we've integrated photographs and three-dimensional drawings and tables, we think, to make the zoning districts much more user-friendly and understandable. In that particular graphic, on the left far, on the district standards or regulations are 2 pages. And we find that many of your current zoning districts can be laid out in a couple of pages. But on the far left, in this particular example, is a purpose statement for the district. To the right, you see photographs, and the photographs are of the desired development character of the district. The section right under that of the use, deals with use regulations, and it references a use table, which Jeff is going to talk about in a few minutes. And then below that are the dimensional standards table. And then on the second page opposite is a graphic that shows the application of the dimensional standards on a site for this particular district. You know, showing how where setback, where the setback should be, where the height, what the height requirements are, and things like that. And then below that is a final table, and that final table references any of the development standards that are relevant and would apply in the district. The parking requirements, the landscape requirements, the lighting requirements in this particular ordinance, signage and things of that nature. So this is an example of how we can use graphics to make the document much more user-friendly. In addition to that, we can use graphics to explain or communicate how parking lots can be laid out, or how buffer widths and buffer requirements, plantings can be used. We also certainly recommend in the assessment that we use flow charts in addition to text to explain graphically how review procedures work. You know, if basically showing that if a rezoning will be reviewed by staff, it'll then be reviewed by the Planning Commission and then by the council. You know, this is done in most of the ordinances that we have drafted over the last 10 or 15 years. The other sort of specific key recommendation on this issue of user friendliness is a recommendation of, I talked about consolidating the procedures in one section, and we suggest 2 or 3 things be done. Number one, not only that they be consolidated, but that we use a set of standard procedures, review procedures that would apply to all development applications, and if there are exceptions between the applications, then they would be set out. But what we have found, and we have done this in many communities, is that it then will for the development community, for the staff, for the review boards, once you set these standard or common procedures, you've got a set of standard procedures. Everybody gets familiar with them. They are very, there's a lot of consistency, and it just makes things more efficient and much more understandable to everyone. We also suggest, for example, a use of tables that will show development applicants, who is going to be reviewing or recommending on any development application. This table to the right actually does that, and then whether or not a public hearing is required. We'll use text, but we'll also use tables, which we think makes the regulation much more user-friendly. We also suggest a few things to streamline development review. We suggest that your procedures for the plan unit development and the development plan be modernized. With respect to plan development, that there will be one procedure that applies to all the different types of plan development. We also suggest that your development plan procedure be handled differently than it's currently being handled. It be handled more in a way that you see handled most development codes in Alabama and all over the Southeast and in most places in the U.S. handle development plans, and that is to use the development plan not for specific rezonings, but just to use it as a tool to ensure compliance with all of the development standards and other requirements of the zoning ordinance before a building permit is issued. In other words, just to require development plan be prepared and show and demonstrate how the parking is being met and the landscaping is being met, that the other rules governing the district are being met, and things of that nature. Finally, we also suggest that we add a new procedure called an administrative adjustment. That would allow for minor deviations to dimensional standards like setback or height be reviewed and approved administratively, subject to specific criteria. We have just about every development code we have done over the last 10 years, 15 years have added this procedure. We're talking about minor changes, a foot or two in a setback. And instead of someone having to go to the Board of Adjustment to get a variance and go through a public hearing process, this will be handled administratively. It could be done much more quickly. So it would simplify and streamline development applications and opportunities in the development process. The second theme, and I can be pretty brief here, is I talked about the importance of ensuring that the policy direction, the goals and the policies in your recently adopted comprehensive plan are implemented. We have a discussion on that in the assessment, but I think the key plan goals that are reflected relative to updating the zoning ordinance is, number one, to streamline the development review process and regulations, of which I've talked about. Enhance the quality of places in the community, and Jeff's going to talk about that in a few minutes. One of the things that we heard in the meetings with the mayor in particular was the need to enhance the design quality of certain types of development in the community, to support a mix of uses in the appropriate locations in the community is another plan goal, to protect resources, natural resources. Jeff is going to talk about that. We are making some recommendations, and then to support the needs of military facilities. Jeff we are suggesting adding a zoning district to do that, and Jeff will talk about that in a minute. With that, I'm going to turn the platform over to Jeff, and he's going to talk about the next couple of themes.
Thanks, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to start talking about theme 3, which is updating your current lineup of zoning districts. There's no right number of zoning districts. Every community is different. It depends on the size of the community. It depends on the different types of uses within a community, and it depends on a community's preferences as well. But we have taken a close look at the zoning districts, reviewed them in the context of Envision Montgomery 2040 and the plan goals, as well as our experience comprehensively updating development regulations. And so we have a number of recommendations to carry forward some of your current districts, to consolidate some districts that are very similar together into one new district, in some cases to add new districts. And there are a few districts that are not used at all or little used, and to take them out of the code to help streamline and make the regulations a little more clear.
As you go through your presentation, could you say the page number you're on so we can look at this, not turn our back?
Absolutely. So right now we're on slide 14. So that's the number on the bottom right of the slide. I'm going to go through the next few slides and just go into a little bit of detail about the changes that we're recommending for the residential districts, the institutional districts, the business districts, as well as the other districts. So you all have a lot of residential zoning districts, and a lot of them are very similar to each other. They differ, there are a lot of districts that allow just single-family development, and several of them have very similar dimensional requirements, 5-foot difference here, a few hundred square feet of lot size there. And so a lot of the recommendations we have here are to consolidate districts where it makes sense, where it doesn't seem, based on our review, that you need multiple districts. We've also changed the naming convention a bit. So if you look at this, the R stands for residential. Your SF, which are these 4 districts, are your single-family districts that generally allow only single-family detached residential development. Then the little number at the end is the minimum lot size for a single-family development in thousands of square feet. So your RSF 12 district, that's proposed to consolidate the R100 and the R85. RSF 12 is a residential single-family district with a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet. And our goal with these residential districts, you know, there's a lot of land in these districts, a lot of people have homes here. They rely on, what's currently there, and they want to make sure that they can continue to, upgrade and make changes to their homes. Our goal with these districts is to have the dimensional standards basically unchanged from what they are now. Some of them, they will adjust a little bit because we're consolidating multiple districts, but the goal is that if you have a property with a building on it that conforms with the current zoning ordinance with regard to setbacks, with regard to maximum height, it will continue to comply with the regulations in the updated zoning ordinance. These are some of the additional zoning district changes we're recommending. Your residential mixed district will accommodate not only single family, but duplexes, as well as 3-family and 4-family homes, as it does today. And your residential multifamily carry forward your current multifamily districts as well. You'll note that you all have 2 townhouse districts and 2 patio garden home districts, which we are proposing to eliminate. It's unusual to have residential districts that only support one kind of housing type. So we're proposing to allow townhouses and patio garden homes in other appropriate districts. We are recommending carrying forward the residential mobile home district as well. You currently have an institutional district, which accommodates institutions like hospitals and things like that. We're recommending carrying that forward, but we also suggest a few other districts that might better accommodate special types of institutions. So one for park and open space, one for universities, where really the city's key concern is how it interfaces with development on the outside of the property. And I'm sorry, we're on slide 17 now. And then finally, there's an institutional military district. That's for Maxwell, and the goal of that is just to have something on the map that says the city standards don't apply because this is a military base. We have some significant changes to the business district lineup. We've proposed eliminating a couple of your existing business districts, and we're proposing a new range of 6 separate business districts that accommodate different types of and different intensities of commercial development, starting at the top with commercial neighborhood. That's your sort of smaller, limited size commercial development that supports a neighborhood, might be located, right outside of a commercial neighborhood, all the way up to your commercial highway, which is your most intense development, sort of auto-oriented right around highway interchanges. But the different types of development are at different scales and plug into different parts of the community where it's appropriate. I do want to point out the commercial corridor district. One thing that we heard at the project kickoff meeting was reiterated today is that the city is very interested in getting some of the underutilized and vacant land in the city redeveloped. And so we envision commercial corridor as a district that includes, a limited set of development standards that ensure high quality development, but without other types of standards that might be obstacles in the way that get in the way of redeveloping these sort of large vacant commercial sites. So that's our new lineup. The B1A and B1B districts are also carried forward and consolidated as the central business district. Again, this is slide 18. Apologies for anyone who's trying to follow along. We are carrying forward those two of the office districts with new names. The ones that the office complex zero lot line is not really used in the city. And in the industrial districts, the M2 district is not really used. There's only one parcel that's zoned that. And so, you know, the theme of simplicity, the theme of user-friendliness, it looks like the city can get by with just two industrial districts, one that accommodates your less intense industrial uses, and then another one that you know, allows the full panoply of industrial uses, some of greater intensity. So we've limited that to two. Finally, planned development. You currently have a PUD district. We're proposing to replace that with a new planned development district. The goal of planned development is to provide developers an option. If they have some sort of an idea, you know, an integrated development with a mix of uses, something that can't really fit very well in any of the existing zoning codes, but is at a higher, or any of the existing zoning districts, but is of a higher quality than the type of development that you would normally get. The goal of PD is to provide an opportunity to do that, you know, for a developer to come in for review and recommendation from this body, approval from the city council, to come in with a project that really is higher quality and meets the city's goals. So the goal of the planned development, there's a procedural part of it and a zoning district part of it. So there'd be heightened standards for approval and a special approval process, and additional requirements to make sure that the developer identifies what standards are being changed from the typical development regulations, and also demonstrating how the development is higher quality than what you would get through a conventional zoning district. And finally, the planned development T&D district, that's a variant of planned development which includes additional standards to support the development of sort of your traditional neighborhood development. Walkable residential neighborhoods with a civic center, a civic area at the center of it, at the edge of it. And finally, you've got flood hazard and airport hazard area districts that will continue in the updated ordinance. Along with that, Craig talked about this a little bit, but modernize the district format. The example he showed you earlier was a two-page spread. This is another way that we do it in some of our codes. It's a one-page spread. So you have all of the sort of relevant information, just a little bit condensed. And I think you'll agree it's a little bit more user-friendly than what you see in your current zoning ordinance. The other big part of this are uses. Now, your current zoning ordinance lists every use under the zoning district. They're grouped together, they're a little bit inconsistent, and you know, a lot of the uses are not defined. And so it can be a little hard to figure out what's allowed in what district. And you know, if you look and compare the different districts, it doesn't always make sense why something is allowed in one district and isn't allowed in another. Our proposal is to have a consolidated use table. On the left, you'll have all the uses, and these are categorized. It's a three-tier system. There's a general use classification, like residential, and then you have a category such as group living or household living, and then you have the individual uses. Each use will be defined. Each use will be carefully calibrated so it's distinct from each other use. And so those are the columns down the left. Along the top, on the right, are the different zoning districts. And so when you look in the cell, there will be a letter that identifies whether that use is permitted by right in that district, if it's only permitted as a special exception, or if it's prohibited. In this example here, if the cell is blank, that means it's prohibited. So it makes it a lot easier for someone using the code to understand what's allowed in each district. It also makes it a lot easier for you to update over time because you have one set of uses, they're all defined, and so you don't have any issues where You have uses which are similar or intended to be the same in different zoning districts, but they have different names. And so you're not sure, well, are they supposed to be the same? Are they not supposed to be the same? Is this allowed? Is this not allowed? So that's our recommendation for how to handle uses in the updated zoning ordinance. Finally, theme 4. I should say finally, this is the last topic that I'm going to discuss. Modernizing development standards. So these were some of our initial recommendations. We go into more detail in the code assessment. And we heard from the mayor, especially today, that the quality of development is one of his key considerations that he would like to see in this update. So I'm just going to go through sort of the highlights of what we're recommending. We're recommending improved access and connectivity standards. So making sure folks can access from one place to another to make sure there are adequate connections for people on foot, on bike, or on car. And also simple things like updating the subdivision standards to require sidewalks on both sides of the street. Off-street parking standards are a big deal, obviously, for a lot of communities. We're going to go through, every use will have an associated parking requirement. Currently, you have much more general parking requirements, and I think what we've heard, and based on our experiences, they're pretty high. You require a lot of parking. And a lot more parking than is needed, and that can, makes development more expensive, and in some cases may make it impossible because it's just not possible to provide the type of parking that the code requires. What we also do is we also provide options for developers to show that they do not need as much parking as the code says, and so they can, as part of their application, they can say, we know that the code requires us to provide 100 spaces. But we think we only need to provide 80 on site, and they can provide, the way they can get parking reductions can vary. They can utilize nearby off-site parking spaces that are available for use at the time that the use is in operation. They might be doing a development with a mix of uses, some of which are active at different times of the day. So you might have a development with an office and a movie theater, and the office will be active during weekdays, and the movie theater would have higher parking demand in the evenings and on the weekends at the times when the office is not occupied as much. And so they can help bring their parking, bring down the amount of parking that they're required to provide. So we'll have a menu of options for developers in those circumstances. Adding new citywide open space requirements. You all do have some open space requirements for some types of development. We're suggesting that you establish required set-asides for all types of new development. Now, these will vary, so you'll have different requirements for residential use versus an industrial use, different amounts of land that's required to be set aside. And you'll also have different sort of types of open space that's required to be provided. So if you're in a more urban context, you would have a different type of open space that you're required to provide versus if you're in a much more rural setting. That's one of the things that can really help improve development quality and also the city as well. Exterior lighting standards. These are, a lot of cities have these. Obviously it takes time because you need, development to take place and lighting to change. But they can really avoid excessive lighting and glare and help preserve the night sky. Form and design standards. That was one of the pieces of feedback we got today, is to add new form and designs, and we're on slide 23, apologies. Add new form and design standards to help improve the look and feel of new development, the look and feel of new buildings, to make sure that they fit in and they reflect the character that the city wants to see. If you all are familiar with the SMART code, these types of standards are similar to what's in the SMART code, but not quite as prescriptive. Give a lot more choices to the developer. And finally, and this is a recommendation that comes out of your plan, has to do with protecting natural features in the city. One thing that a lot of cities have are regulations to protect riparian buffers. So this is land alongside rivers. And when you have effective riparian buffer standards, you sort of limit the type of development that can take place in these riparian areas. This helps to improve downstream water quality, it reduces erosion, and helps protect some of the natural places. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Craig to talk about theme 5.
Very quickly, thanks, Jeff. One of the other issues, and I highlighted this in terms of implementing the plan direction, and that is to support revitalization and redevelopment. One of the things that we have learned in working in other sort of built, mature communities is that one of the key elements of supporting revitalization and redevelopment is removing any obstacles they have in the existing zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations for redevelopment. I talked about that administrative adjustment, which allows for streamlined administrative deviations for minor deviations. And we have found in infill, in particular in infill and redevelopment context, that really is something that will remove some obstacles and allow people to redevelop. Another thing that we are suggesting that as we draft the code, that we apply where it makes sense is something called contextual standards. And basically what contextual standards are is that they will override dimensional standards in instances in zone districts where what the person who is redeveloping in an infill context or any context basically comes very close to mimicking the setbacks or the height requirements that already exist in the neighborhood or the area. For example, we have found that there are, where you've got a zone district that has a setback, and some of the blocks or some of the areas in that zone district have a setback that no one in that area complies with. It creates an obstacle for redevelopment. So we're basically, that standard would allow someone, as long as they follow that existing development pattern, to redevelop, that they would be conforming if they did that. Another thing that we are recommending is that we add what we call alternative compliance provisions that allow more flexibility in complying with development standards. Whether it is parking requirements or whether it is landscaping requirements. If, for example, in a buffer, where there's a buffer requirement or a landscaping requirement that for some reason the applicant doesn't believe they can meet the specific letter of the requirement in the code, that they can offer an alternative and demonstrate that it is equal to achieving the objective that landscaping requirement has, that they would have the ability to do that. So that is, and as we go through in the drafting stages, we will look for other opportunities to remove obstacles to redevelopment in the community. With that, as I mentioned, the parts in the assessment that follow the diagnosis are the annotated outline. I've talked earlier about the proposed structure, so I'm not going to repeat that, other than to say, the structure that is proposed for the updated code will build, in the zoning ordinance, will build around those three organizing themes: consolidating the procedures, consolidating the development standards, and integrating the zoning districts and the use regulations. In many respects, the subdivision will be very similar in terms of consolidating the procedures and then setting out the subdivision standards in a logical way. So with that, that is an overview of the assessment. We'd certainly welcome your input on that, if you have any questions or comments. So Jeff, I'm going to.
I've got one. Has anybody evaluated or looked at my suggestion of when property is rezoned, I'm talking about unused land, rezoned and not used in a period of time, maybe 5 years, 10 years, it reverts back to its original zoning?
Let me just make sure I understand this. If an applicant comes in for a rezoning and it's approved, but then they don't do anything with the
And
land.
they don't do anything for years, you know, have
If
a
that
time
could
frame that it would revert back.
to its original zoning.
Yeah. And then,
You're
then
asking,
who,
can you do that, or
what's that?
your question is, can,
Speaking to the mic, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Is your question, can someone do that, or can you put a provision in the code?
Well, it was a
that allows-
recommendation or suggestion by me, and was that implemented in this? I didn't hear it.
No, and we have not permitted that in any of the development codes we have done. I know and we're working in Tuscaloosa right now and also in Decatur, and they have not suggested that. In a lot of states, that is not allowed by state law. In other words, once you have rezoned property, the only way to change the zoning would be to go through another rezoning and revert back. One of the things we could look at in your qualified zoning districts, we could look and see if something like that could be done as if you include it as a condition of one of the approvals. But I am not familiar with any development codes that allow that.
But you could research that and see if it's legal?
I think that has come up. I know I have had situations where on property I had that, was zoned multifamily, and the multifamily units had been taken down and it was now back. And, you get a contract on it and they want to build a storage, and my belief is that it's to the disadvantage of the owner if it's rezoned and then for some reason that sale doesn't go through. He's sitting there with a piece of property that could be multifamily, which is the hardest to get in just any any city. That's one that I'd like to see, that we had that flexibility. It might be for a year's period that a person that was trying to get that rezoned, and they had a year or whatever's reasonable to utilize that for whatever purpose that rezoning was, and then if it didn't, it could revert back to whatever the other zoning is, because the loser in that deal is the owner.
We would have to evaluate whether that could be done under the Alabama statutes.
And I think that I think you nailed it, because I think that somewhere I've got in my brain that has come up, and that was the problem. So yes, sir. I think, but I'm with him. If you would. If y'all look
we
at
will
it,
take a look at it.
Yeah, you understand what I'm.
Yes,
it's a loser and a.
Yeah, I do think that I will say I mentioned that qualified, district is because there are conditions that you can place on the approval. The one place I have seen it before is with a planned development approval, which is a form of zoning.
Right.
But again, it is a situation where you include conditions of approval. You approve a site plan, and in many of the one of the things we discuss in the assessment is the need for conditions of approval in a planned development. But I have seen that included in a planned development condition, which basically says if you don't develop X within 3 years or 5 years, then the then the plan development reverts back to the district it was before.
But you've just seen it in a PUD.
I have only seen it in the plan, in the PUD.
I'd love to see us be able to do it as a planning commission. but
Robert,
that-
did you have anything to add to that?
No,
I thought you came up to talk.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to it. I've never seen that done. I was of the thinking that
It's rare, it's very rare.
that a
it
person would have
happen.
to come back and rezone it after y'all have approved it on
But-
your
but that-
advisory, and then you send it to the council, and then the council makes the final decision to do it. I would think that a person would have to start over and come back and ask for it to be rezoned back to what it was before.
Actually, I was talking about undeveloped land, and Buddy's
I'm mad,
example
I'm
was
mad
something.
what has happened to me, okay?
Yeah, but he's talking about something that's been developed before. I was talking about some undeveloped land. Somebody just zoned it a certain way and doesn't do
And never
anything with
never
it.
went forward with
There ought to be a
anything.
time frame when we revert back to
Yeah,
ag or something.
I mean, I think it's a good question. We'll just have to do the research and see if it's something that can or can't be done, and just follow up with you on an answer to that question.
Good.
Okay.
I have a question.
My question is concerning, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My question is concerning the minor adjustments. Have you had any problems with what you're calling minor adjustments, which are handled by staff in other cities or in other situations? We've got a good staff here. I don't think it's a big problem here, but have you seen problems where that gets abused?
That's part of
We
my,
actually have seen no problems in any of the communities. Now, I will tell you that those provisions are tailored for each community. I mean, you will, in terms of what they allow, in terms of the minor deviation, they will vary, you know.
Okay, so you'll get with the staff here to determine.
Yeah,
What's
it
appropriate?
would be the land use administrator or identified staff person. Now, we have included provisions that allow those to be appealed. In other words, if one is denied, for example, it could be appealed to the BOA. Some communities don't do that. They just use the administrator. But to be quite honest with you, it has been a real plus in the communities where it's used, just because it allows these just minor changes to be made so that applicants don't have to go through a variance process. What you have to be careful about is you have to make sure it's minor, and you have to make sure you have good standards.
That was my concern. When does minor become major?
So,
Okay.
yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to ask on the administrative adjustment. I mean, I think I read today that you said 15% or less, up to 15%, they can come for whether it's setback, height, or whatever the case may be. But how many times can they come back for that?
I'm sorry. How many?
How many times can they request an administrative adjustment for the height?
You get
or-
one administrative adjustment.
But I didn't read that. I didn't see that in the information when I pulled it up today. I didn't see the one adjustment.
Well, I mean, it will be written in the regulation, but is that? I don't know if I heard what you said correctly, but if the percentage is 15% and the setback in your zone district is 10 feet, then you can get a 1.5 foot adjustment. You can get it one time. If, for example, the height limit is 30 feet and you got 15%, then 15% of 30 is 4.5 feet. So I mean, but you can adjust these. It's very interesting in some of the communities where we have worked. Norfolk, Virginia, for example, which is very built community. They actually identified areas in the community where those adjustments they were allowing 20% or 25%. Other areas only 10%.
No, I understand that part. My question is, if they come back for an administrative adjustment for the setback, for example, and it's at 15%, and they get that, can they come back again for the same thing? Can they do it more than one time? Is what
No.
I'm asking, for the same thing. But
No.
I didn't see it written in your proposal.
Well,
That
this
I
is,
read
this is an assessment. We didn't draft the language. The language, and we can send you examples of codes that have been adopted, and it's very clear that you can only do it one time.
Okay.
Just a couple things to add. We said 15%, some communities you can have, you can't adjust the front setback at all. If that's an important standard that you don't want deviated from, then you can say you're not allowed to have administrative adjustments on certain standards. And they can be different allowances for different types. So you could have 5% for a side setback and 10% for height. And that's something we'll discuss with staff. The other, excuse me, the other thing is an applicant's not required to prove hardship like they are with a variance, but it's not they need to show something more than I just want to do it. They need to show that there's some, purpose that's being served for, needing this adjustment to the standard rules. So it's not I want to do this for funsies. It's, there's this, problem with the site, or I'd really like to configure it this way, but I need to go 1 foot into the side setback in order to do that. So there are standards that staff is required to apply, but it's not as, it's not as difficult to meet as the hardship requirement for a variance, and it's also handled at the staff level, and not at, not by requiring the Board of Adjustment to act.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment or question? Thank y'all. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Robert. Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, we're adjourned.